Dr. Marcus Chen's voice cut through the ICU like a scalpel, sharp, precise, and designed to leave a mark. "Step away from the patient, Dr. Rivera." The words hung in the sterile air of Johns Hopkins Hospital's critical care unit, and Sarah Rivera felt every pair of eyes in the room land on her. Her hand, still resting on the ventilator settings panel, trembled slightly. Through the glass partition, the patient, a 53-year-old man named David Thornton, lay motionless, his chest rising and falling only because machines commanded it to do so. Sarah didn't move immediately. She was staring at something on the monitor that didn't make sense, a pattern in the oxygen saturation levels that seemed almost cyclical. But Dr. Chen was already moving toward her, his white coat billowing slightly with the force of his approach. "Did you hear me?" His tone was quieter now, which somehow made it worse. The entire nursing station had gone silent. Even the constant beeping of monitors seemed muted by the weight of professional humiliation unfolding in real time. "I was just reviewing," Sarah began. "You were adjusting settings without consultation," Chen interrupted, "on a patient who has been under my direct care for 11 days, a patient whose family has already been counseled about end-of-life decisions." He paused, and Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. How much of this reprimand should be private? How much should serve as a lesson to everyone watching? This is exactly why second-year residents don't make autonomous decisions in my ICU. Sarah's face burned. She was 29 years old, 6 months into her internal medicine residency, and this was the third time in 2 weeks that Dr. Chen had dressed her down in front of colleagues. The first time, she'd made an error with medication dosing, a genuine mistake that could have been serious. The second time, she'd questioned his decision to discontinue antibiotics on a septic patient, and she'd been wrong, but this time felt different. "With respect, Dr. Chen, I think there's something—" "Conference room, now." He didn't wait for her response, just turned and walked toward the small glass-walled office adjacent to the ICU. Sarah followed, aware of the sympathetic glances from 2 nurses and the carefully neutral expression on the face of Dr. James Keller, the senior resident who'd been mentoring her. The late October rain drummed against the windows of the 7th floor, creating a rhythm that matched her accelerating heartbeat. Inside the conference room, Dr. Chen closed the door with deliberate care. He was 46, originally from San Francisco, with a reputation that preceded him everywhere in the hospital. 2 published books on critical care medicine, a National Institutes of Health grant. 3 years ago, he'd been featured in a documentary about innovation in intensive care units. Sarah had actually watched it before applying to Hopkins, had been inspired by his combination of brilliance and apparent compassion. The reality had been somewhat different. "Sit down," he said, though he remained standing. Sarah sat. Through the glass wall, she could see the ICU continuing its relentless work. Nurses checking lines, monitors displaying their endless data, the controlled chaos of keeping dying people alive. "Do you know what David Thornton's diagnosis is?" Chen asked. "Advanced pneumonia, possible fungal involvement, respiratory failure requiring mechanical ventilation for 11 days. Kidneys are failing. There's evidence of multi-organ dysfunction. And his prognosis?" Sarah hesitated. "Poor." "His prognosis is 0, Chen said flatly. "We're not talking about poor outcomes. We're talking about a man who will not recover. His family, a wife, 2 adult children. They've been here every day for almost 2 weeks. I've had 4 conversations with them about what comes next. They're making peace with losing him. But the oxygen saturation pattern is meaningless noise in the context of complete systemic failure." Chen finally sat down, and his voice took on a different quality, not softer exactly, but weighted with something that might have been genuine concern. Sarah, you're not stupid. You graduated in the top 10% of your class at Cornell. Your clinical skills are actually quite good when you're not second-guessing yourself or reaching for diagnoses that aren't there. She waited, sensing the but coming. But you have a problem with boundaries, with authority, with accepting that medicine isn't about being the hero who sees what everyone else missed. Sometimes it's about recognizing when we've done everything we can. And the kind thing, the professional thing, is to step back and let someone die with dignity. What if we're wrong? The question came out before Sarah could stop it. Jen's expression didn't change. We're not wrong. His white blood cell count is through the roof. His kidneys are shutting down. His brain activity is minimal. The imaging shows extensive bilateral infiltrates. He's been on maximum ventilator support for 11 days with no improvement. These aren't subjective assessments, Dr. Rivera. These are objective facts. I understand that, but do you? He leaned forward slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're so desperate to prove something that you're willing to give false hope to a grieving family. And that's not just unprofessional, it's cruel. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of her mother, who died of breast cancer when Sarah was 16. She thought of the doctors who'd kept trying, kept hoping, kept fighting until the very end, and how much that had meant. But she also remembered the ones who'd talked about quality of life and realistic expectations, and how angry her father had been at them. I'm not trying to give false hope, she said quietly. I'm trying to be thorough. You're trying to be right. Chen stood up. And there's a difference. Learn it, or you won't make it through this residency. He left the conference room, and Sarah sat there alone, watching the rain stream down the windows and feeling something cold settle in her chest. Across the ICU, David Thornton's monitors continued their steady beeping, oblivious to the argument about his fate. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo she kept there, her mother in the hospital 2 weeks before she died, smiling at something Sarah's younger brother had said. The doctors had said there was no hope then, too. They'd been right, but Sarah's mother had wanted those extra 2 weeks. She'd needed them. Was Sarah projecting? Probably. Was she letting her personal history cloud her medical judgment? Almost certainly. But as she looked at David Thornton's chart on her tablet, at the mysterious pattern in his oxygen levels that no one else seemed to find significant, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being missed. The locker room door opened, and Sarah looked up to see Dr. Amara Okafor, another second-year resident, enter with her usual quiet efficiency. Amara was 31, had done her undergraduate degree at Howard University, and possessed the kind of calm competence that made her seem far more experienced than she was. "Rough day?" Amara asked, sitting down on the bench across from Sarah. "Chen again." "Ah." Amara started unlacing her shoes. "What was it this time?" "I questioned his decision to withdraw care on a patient in front of everyone." Sarah hesitated. "The thing is, I think I might be right. There's a pattern in the vitals that doesn't match the diagnosis." Amara was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. "You know what my father told me when I started medical school? He said, being right doesn't matter if you're dead. He was talking about being a black doctor in America, but it applies here too. Chen can end your career before it starts, Sarah, even if you're right. So I should just ignore what I'm seeing." "I didn't say that." Amara tied her shoes and stood up. "I'm saying you need to be smart about it. Chen's not evil. He's not even wrong most of the time. But he's got blind spots. And one of them is that he hates being challenged in public. If you want him to listen, you need to give him a way to save face." Sarah thought about that as Amara left. Save face. Make it his idea. Frame it as learning, not correction. The politics of medicine were almost as complex as the science. She packed up her things and walked out to the parking garage, her footsteps echoing in the concrete space. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glittering. Baltimore could be beautiful at night if you knew where to look. The inner harbor with its lights reflecting on dark water, the old neighborhoods with their brick row houses, the sense of history layered beneath the modern glass and steel. Sarah had grown up in a small town in upstate New York, and cities still felt foreign to her sometimes. The constant noise, the compressed humanity, the way everyone was always moving, always urgent. But Hopkins had been her dream since she was 16, since those doctors had fought for her mother in that small-town hospital, and she'd decided she wanted to be like them. Now she was here, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. Harder, more complicated, full of impossible decisions, and people like Marcus Chen who were brilliant and frustrating in equal measure. Her phone buzzed. A text from James Keller. "Coffee later? You okay?" She typed back, "Yeah, thanks." But she wasn't okay. And as she walked back into the ICU, past Dr. Chen, who was now discussing something with the attending physician on duty, past the nurses who carefully didn't make eye contact, Sarah made a decision that she knew might end her career before it really started. She was going to figure out what was wrong with David Thornton, even if she had to do it completely on her own. The Thornton family arrived at 2 o'clock, same as they had every day for the past 11 days. Sarah watched them from the nursing station, Elizabeth Thornton, 51, moving with the exhausted precision of someone running on willpower and gas station coffee. Behind her came their daughter, Maya, 26, and their son Connor, 23. Connor was wearing his University of Maryland sweatshirt, the same one he'd worn for the past 4 days. Sarah had learned to read families the way she read labs. The Thorntons were holding together by threads. Elizabeth's hands shook slightly when she reached for the hand sanitizer. Maya's eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Connor kept his distance from his father's room, hovering near the doorway as if proximity might make the reality more concrete than he could handle. "Dr. Rivera." Sarah turned to find James Keller beside her, 2 cups of the terrible cafeteria coffee in his hands. He offered her one without comment, and they stood together, watching the family settle into the familiar choreography of bedside vigil. "Chen chewed you out pretty good," James said quietly. "I deserved some of it." "Maybe." James was 32, married, with a 1-year-old daughter whose photos covered his locker. He'd gone to medical school later than most, after working as a paramedic in Baltimore for 6 years. Sarah trusted him more than almost anyone else in the program, but not all of it. She glanced at him. "You think I'm wrong about Thornton?" "I think you're probably wrong," he said carefully. "But I also think Chen's gotten so good at accepting death that he might miss the 1 in 1,000 case where we shouldn't." He paused. "What did you see in the O2 patterns?" Sarah pulled up the chart on her tablet, keeping her voice low. "Look at this. Every 6 hours, almost like clockwork, there's a brief spike in saturation. Just for 10, 15 minutes. Then it drops back down. But the spikes are consistent. That's not random noise." James studied the data. "Could be artifact from position changes when the nurses turn him." "I thought that too. But I checked the nursing notes. The timing doesn't match. Equipment malfunction. 3 different monitors. Over 11 days. James was quiet for a moment. Through the glass, they could see Elizabeth Thornton talking to her husband, one hand on his arm, her mouth moving in what might have been prayer or simply the one-sided conversation of the desperate. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "I'm thinking that something in his body is trying to compensate, some system that's not completely failed yet, fighting back on a cycle we don't understand." Sarah knew how it sounded. "I know that's not a diagnosis. I know it's barely even a hypothesis, but you can't let it go." "No." James sighed. "Chen specifically told you to step back from this case." "I know. And if you keep pushing, he'll make your life hell, worse than he already has." I know that too. James looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing something, his own career, his responsibilities, the unwritten rules about challenging attendings and supporting colleagues. Finally, he said, "What if we approached it differently? Not as questioning Chen's judgment, but as a learning case, for educational purposes." "How?" "I've got a friend in pulmonology. Owes me a favor from when I covered his night shift during his kid's birthday. Maybe we could get him to take a look, unofficially. Fresh eyes, different specialty. If he sees nothing, you drop it. If he sees something—" James shrugged. "Then at least you'll know you tried." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. "You'd do that?" "I'm not doing it for you," James said, but his slight smile undercut the words. "I'm doing it because I've got a daughter, and someday, if she's in a hospital bed, I want there to be doctors who give a damn about details everyone else missed." He drained his coffee. "Besides, Chen's been riding you too hard. He's a brilliant doctor, but he's got his blind spots like everyone else. One of them is that he thinks humility means accepting defeat." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Dr. Rashid won't be available until tomorrow morning, and in the meantime, you need to be squeaky clean on everything else. No mistakes, no attitude, no giving Chen any reason to write you up." Sarah nodded. She spent the rest of her shift being the model resident, anticipating orders before they were given, double-checking every medication, staying late to help a nurse with a difficult IV placement. She avoided David Thornton's room entirely, though she found herself glancing at his monitors whenever she passed. At 8 p.m., as her shift was ending, she saw Dr. Chen having another conversation with the Thornton family in the small consultation room. Through the window, she could see Elizabeth Thornton crying, her children on either side of her. Chen's body language was professional, compassionate even. He was good at these conversations, knew how to deliver terrible news with dignity. Sarah changed out of her scrubs in the resident locker room, the space empty at this hour, except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of pages echoing through the hospital halls. Baltimore in late October meant early darkness, and as she walked to her car in the parking garage, the city lights were already glittering against the rain-washed night. Her apartment was in Fells Point, a neighborhood she'd chosen because it reminded her of the college towns where she'd always felt most comfortable. Brick row houses, local bars, the sense of community compressed into narrow streets. She'd been living there for 6 months and barely knew any of her neighbors. Residency didn't leave time for building a life. Inside her tiny one-bedroom, Sarah microwaved leftover Thai food and opened her laptop. She knew she should sleep. Tomorrow was another 12-hour shift. But instead she found herself reading everything she could find about unusual presentations of respiratory failure, about cyclic patterns in oxygen saturation, about cases where patients had recovered against impossible odds. At midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Dr. Rivera?" The voice was female, young, uncertain. "Yes? This is Maya Thornton. I'm sorry to call so late. I got your number from one of the nurses." A pause. "Is that weird? I didn't mean to be weird." "It's okay," Sarah said, her heart rate picking up. "Is your father?" "He's the same, no change." Maya's voice cracked slightly. I saw you looking at his monitors today, and I heard Dr. Chen tell you to step away. But the way you were looking at the screens, it seemed like you saw something different from what everyone else sees." Sarah closed her laptop. "Maya, I can't really discuss." "Please." The word was raw. "Everyone's being so kind, so compassionate. They're all helping us prepare and find peace and celebrate his life. But no one's talking about saving him, no one except. I thought maybe you were, even for just a second." Sarah thought about professional boundaries, about the conversation with Dr. Chen, about all the very good reasons she should deflect this call and go to bed. "I saw a pattern," she said instead, "in his oxygen levels. It might be nothing, probably is nothing. But a colleague and I are going to have someone else take a look tomorrow, just to be thorough." Maya was quiet for so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. Then, "Thank you. Even if it's nothing, thank you for looking." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness of her apartment, listening to the sounds of Fells Point on a Tuesday night, distant laughter from the bars on Thames Street, the rumble of a truck passing, someone's television playing too loud through thin walls. She thought about her mother, about the doctors who'd fought and the ones who'd counselled acceptance, and about how she'd never quite forgiven the ones who'd been right. The truth was more complicated than she'd admitted to Maya Thornton. The patterns Sarah had seen could be artifact, could be the machines lying, the data corrupted, her own desperate need to find something where nothing existed. She'd seen it before in medical school, students so eager to make a diagnosis that they saw zebras instead of horses, exotic diseases instead of common ones. But she'd also learned to trust her instincts, at least a little. That internal voice that whispered something's wrong here, when everything looked normal on paper. It was the same instinct that had made her double-check a medication dose 3 months ago, catching an error that would have sent a patient into cardiac arrest. The same instinct that had made her order one more test on a woman everyone said had simple pneumonia, revealing the lung cancer hidden beneath. Sometimes the instinct was wrong, often even. But when it was right, it saved lives. Sarah opened her laptop again and pulled up the hospital's digital library. She spent the next 2 hours reading case studies, searching for any documented instances of cyclical oxygen patterns in critical respiratory failure. Most of what she found was noise, normal variations, equipment issues, positioning effects. But there were a few outliers, rare cases where unusual patterns had pointed to diagnoses that standard workups had missed. One case from Massachusetts General Hospital, published 3 years ago, described a patient with similar cyclical variations. The final diagnosis had been an unusual autoimmune condition affecting pulmonary vasculature, creating temporary improvements followed by deterioration in predictable cycles. The patient had recovered after targeted immunosuppressive therapy. Sarah made notes, cross-referenced symptoms, compared Thornton's presentation with the published case. There were similarities, but also significant differences, not enough to be certain, but enough to justify further investigation. At 2 a.m., she finally closed her laptop and tried to sleep. Her alarm would go off in 4 hours. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hospital at 6:30, earlier than her shift required. The ICU had a different quality at this hour, quieter. The overnight staff preparing to hand off to the day team, the light from the east-facing windows washing everything in pale gold. She found James in the cafeteria as planned, looking slightly more alert than she felt. He'd brought printouts of Thornton's labs and imaging. "I did some reading last night," he said, sliding papers across the table. "Found a few cases that might be relevant. Also talked to my wife. She's an immunologist, did I mention that? She said if there's an autoimmune component, the standard pneumonia treatment could actually be making things worse." Sarah felt a chill. Making things worse how? "Steroids. We've been giving him steroids for the lung inflammation, right? Standard protocol. But if the underlying issue is an autoimmune vasculitis, the dose might not be high enough to treat it effectively, and we might be suppressing his immune system just enough to let opportunistic infections take hold." James tapped one of the papers. "It could explain why he's not responding to antibiotics. We might be treating the wrong thing." Her phone buzzed with another text from James. "Dr. Rashid can see the case at 7 a.m. Meet me in the cafeteria at 6:45. Sarah set her alarm and finally crawled into bed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of monitors and beeping machines and voices asking her to step away, please step away. Dr. Yusuf Rashid arrived at the ICU at 7 a.m. with the energy of someone who actually enjoyed mornings. He was 38, wearing a bow tie under his white coat, and had a reputation in pulmonology for both brilliance and a complete inability to tolerate bureaucratic nonsense. "So," he said, after James had explained the situation and Sarah had walked him through David Thornton's chart, "you want me to tell you if Chen missed something, but you don't want Chen to know we're checking." "Essentially," James said. "And if I find something, it'll put you both in an interesting position. If I don't find anything, Sarah here looks like she's on a crusade based on emotion rather than evidence." Rashid grinned. "I love it. Let me see the patient." They went to David Thornton's room together, early enough that the family hadn't arrived yet. In the harsh morning light, Thornton looked worse than Sarah remembered. His skin had taken on a greyish pallor. His face was swollen from 11 days of fluid retention, and the ventilator hissed and clicked with mechanical persistence. Rashid spent 20 minutes doing a physical exam that was more thorough than anything Sarah had seen outside of teaching rounds. He listened to lung sounds from a dozen different positions. He examined the skin, the nail beds, the subtle responses to various stimuli. He pulled up imaging on his tablet and scrolled through CT scans with the focus of someone reading a novel. Finally, he straightened up. "Okay, the good news is you're not crazy. There's definitely something odd here. The bad news is I have no idea what it is." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Missy did, the O2 saturation pattern you noticed. It's real, not artifact, not random. There's a cyclical component that suggests some kind of metabolic process operating on a 6-hour rhythm." He pulled up a graph on his tablet. "But here's the thing. Nothing in his presentation should allow for that. His lungs are wrecked, multiple infiltrates, consolidation, the works. He should not be capable of the kind of momentary improvement you're seeing in these spikes." "So what's causing it?" James asked. "No clue. Could be some unusual infectious process with a weird life cycle. Could be an autoimmune thing we're missing. Could be." Rashid hesitated. "Look, I'm going to say something that's going to sound insane, but bear with me. What if we're looking at two different problems that happen to occur simultaneously?" Sarah felt something click in her mind. "The pneumonia isn't the primary issue. Maybe not." Rashid started pulling up more labs. "See, here's what bothers me. His white count is elevated, yes, but look at the differential. The pattern doesn't quite match bacterial or fungal pneumonia. It's close, but not exact. And his inflammatory markers, they're high, but they're not behaving the way I'd expect if this was pure infection-driven respiratory failure." "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked. "I'm thinking we should run a full autoimmune panel. Also, I want to look at his medication history, not just what we've been giving him here, but what he was taking before admission. Sometimes drug reactions can create presentations that mimic infection." Rashid looked at James. "This is going to require involving Chen. You can't run these tests without the attending's approval." "He'll shut it down," Sarah said. "Maybe. But if we present it right, not as you missed something, but as here's an atypical pattern worth investigating for academic purposes, he might bite. Chen's ego is big, but so is his curiosity. Frame it as a mystery rather than a mistake." The door to the ICU opened, and Elizabeth Thornton entered with her daughter. They looked startled to see 3 doctors in the room. "Is something wrong?" Elizabeth asked, and Sarah could hear both hope and fear in her voice. Rashid stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm Dr. Rashid from pulmonology. Dr. Keller asked me to consult on your husband's case just to provide a fresh perspective. We're seeing some patterns that are a bit unusual, and we'd like to run a few additional tests, if that's all right with you." "Additional tests," Maya said. "Does that mean there's hope?" And there it was, the question that could not be answered honestly without being cruel or dishonest. Sarah watched Rashid navigate it with the skill of someone who'd been here before. "It means we want to be absolutely thorough," he said gently. "I can't make any promises about outcomes, but I believe in looking at every angle. Is that okay with you?" Elizabeth nodded, tears already forming. "Yes, please. Whatever you think might help." After they left the room, Rashid turned to Sarah and James. "All right, here's the play. I'll talk to Chen, frame this as a teaching case with unusual features. James, you run interference if needed. Sarah, you stay completely out of this conversation. Chen already has issues with you, so any involvement from you will just trigger his defenses." "I can do that," Sarah said, though it felt like swallowing glass. The confrontation happened 2 hours later in Chen's office. Sarah wasn't there, but James texted her updates. Rashid, presenting the case, Chen's listening. He's skeptical. Rashid mentioned the publication potential. Chen's agreeing to limited additional testing. Sarah was in the middle of examining a post-op patient when her pager went off. ICU. Stat. Room 714. David Thornton's room. She ran, her heart hammering, expecting to find a code in progress. Instead, she found organized chaos, nurses adjusting equipment, Dr. Chen at the bedside, and the monitors showing something impossible. David Thornton's oxygen saturation was at 94%, without ventilator assistance. "What happened?" Sarah asked breathlessly. One of the nurses, Patricia, who'd been working with Thornton since his admission, looked up. "He just started breathing on his own 10 minutes ago. Spontaneous respiratory effort sustained, strong enough that we're backing off the vent settings." Dr. Chen was examining Thornton's chest, his expression unreadable. "Get me the autoimmune panel results the moment they're back from the lab. Also, I want a toxicology screen, comprehensive, including everything unusual. And get neurology down here for a consult." He straightened up and, for the first time Sarah could remember, looked directly at her without irritation or dismissal. "Dr. Rivera, you're the one who noticed the O2 pattern. What else did you observe that we might have missed?" Sarah's mind raced. His positioning. The spikes in oxygen seemed to correlate with times when he'd been turned to his left side. I thought it was coincidence, but if there's an asymmetric process, positioning could absolutely affect perfusion and ventilation. Chen was already moving. "Let's get a bedside ultrasound. I want to see if there's something localized that we've been treating as systemic." The next 3 hours were a blur. Sarah found herself working directly with Chen, who had transformed from antagonist to collaborator with startling speed. The ultrasound revealed what the CT scans had obscured: a localized pleural mass, small but significant, that had been compressing blood vessels and creating the very symptoms they'd attributed to advanced pneumonia. The autoimmune panel came back positive for vasculitis, inflammation of blood vessels that had created a perfect storm of complications when combined with the pleural mass and a subsequent opportunistic infection. "It's treatable," Rashid said, reviewing the results with the team. "Not easy, not guaranteed, but absolutely treatable. The pneumonia was real, but it was secondary to the vasculitis. Treat the underlying condition, manage the mass, and the respiratory failure should resolve." The conference room filled with people: Chen, Rashid, James, 2 senior attending physicians, a rheumatologist who'd been called in for consultation. Sarah stood at the edge of the group, still processing what they'd found. Dr. Lisa Park, the rheumatologist, was pointing at images on the screen. ANCA-associated vasculitis, most likely granulomatosis with polyangiitis. The pleural mass is actually a granuloma, inflamed tissue that's been pressing on the pulmonary vessels and creating the respiratory compromise. Combined with the secondary infection, it created a presentation that looked like end-stage pneumonia. Prognosis: Chen asked. If we'd kept treating it as simple pneumonia, he would have died probably within 48 hours. Park pulled up a treatment protocol, but with proper immunosuppression, high-dose steroids, probably cyclophosphamide, aggressive management of the infection, he's got a good chance. Not certain, but good. Maybe 70%. 70%. The number hung in the air. 2 days ago, David Thornton's chance of survival had been effectively 0. Now it was 70%, and the difference was a pattern that Sarah had noticed and refused to ignore. "We need to talk to the family," Chen said. "This changes everything." The conversation with the Thorntons happened in the same consultation room where, days earlier, Chen had been preparing them for their husband and father's death. Sarah watched through the window as Elizabeth Thornton's expression transformed from exhausted resignation to disbelieving hope. Maya started crying. Connor, who'd been standing rigid and silent, suddenly sat down hard in a chair, his hands over his face. Chen was explaining the diagnosis, the treatment, the risks and uncertainties. He was good at this, Sarah realized, not just the difficult conversations about death, but these moments of unexpected hope too. He didn't oversell it, didn't make promises he couldn't keep, but he gave them something they hadn't had in days, a real chance. When the family left to process the information, Chen found Sarah in the hallway. "Walk with me," he said. They went to the hospital's rooftop garden, a small green space that someone had created years ago as a refuge for stressed medical staff. The November air was cold, but the sun was out, and from here you could see across Baltimore to the harbor. "I owe you an apology," Chen said. Sarah was so surprised she almost didn't respond. "Sir? I was wrong about Thornton. More importantly, I was wrong about how I handled the situation with you." Chen leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. "I've been doing this long enough that I should know better than to dismiss a resident's concerns out of hand, especially when they're based on observed data rather than just gut feeling." "You weren't entirely wrong to be skeptical," Sarah said. "The odds of finding something like this, the odds don't matter if the patient dies because we stopped looking." Chen turned to face her. "You know what the hardest part of this job is? It's not the medical complexity. It's not the long hours or the emotional toll. It's knowing when to keep fighting and when to let go. I thought I'd figured that out. Maybe I got too comfortable with letting go." Elizabeth Thornton sobbed when they told her. Connor actually hugged Dr. Chen. Maya pulled Sarah aside in the hallway, her eyes red but bright. "You saved him," she said. "No," Sarah replied honestly. "I just noticed something. A lot of people saved him." But that night, when Chen asked Sarah to stay after rounds, she braced herself for the reckoning she knew was coming. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "Yes. You went behind my back to bring in another consultant. Technically, Dr. Keller did that. Don't pass words with me, Dr. Rivera." But there was no heat in his voice. "You were right, this time. Do you understand how statistically unlikely that is? How often residents think they've found something everyone else missed, and they're simply wrong?" "I do." Chen leaned back in his chair. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I've learned to recognize when we're prolonging suffering instead of preserving life. I've held families together through impossible decisions. And I've gotten good at it, maybe too good. Good enough that I started seeing patterns where I should have been seeing individuals." He paused, and Sarah saw something in his face she hadn't seen before, doubt or maybe just exhaustion. "David Thornton should have died," he continued. "By every reasonable metric, by every bit of experience I have, he should not be breathing on his own right now. But he is, and that's because you were stubborn enough to look past what I told you was true." "Dr. Chen, I'm not finished." He stood up. "You were also reckless, insubordinate, and you let personal emotions cloud your judgment. The fact that you were right this time doesn't mean you'll be right next time. Medicine isn't about being the hero. It's about being rigorous, being humble, and knowing the difference between persistence and delusion. I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet. Chen walked to the window, looking out over the Baltimore skyline. But you will, and when you do, you might actually become the kind of doctor who can hold both things at once, the wisdom to accept death when it's truly inevitable, and the courage to fight when everyone else has given up. He turned back to her. I'm going to be harder on you now, not easier, because now I know what you're capable of, and I'm not going to let you coast on one lucky diagnosis. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. Now get out of here. You've got rounds in 6 hours. 3 weeks later, David Thornton walked out of Johns Hopkins Hospital with his wife's hand in his. Sarah watched from the window of the resident lounge, coffee in hand, a smile she couldn't quite suppress on her face. Still feels unreal, doesn't it? James appeared beside her, looking as tired as she felt. 3 weeks ago, he was hours from a terminal extubation. Now he's going home. He'll need months of treatment, Sarah said. The vasculitis doesn't just disappear. He'll be on immunosuppressants, steroids, regular monitoring. Always the optimist, just the realist. James laughed. Yeah, Chen's really rubbed off on you these past few weeks. He wasn't wrong. The past 3 weeks had been the hardest of Sarah's residency. Dr. Chen had kept his word. He was pushing her relentlessly, questioning every decision, making her justify every clinical choice. But there was a difference now. He was teaching her, not just testing her, showing her how to think through complex cases, how to weigh evidence, how to know when to fight and when to let go. 2 days ago, they'd had another patient in similar circumstances, an elderly woman with multi-organ failure, family begging for more time. Sarah had spent hours reviewing the case, looking for the same kind of hidden pattern she'd found with Thornton. But there was nothing. No mystery to solve, no misdiagnosis. Just a body that had reached its limit. She'd been the one to recommend withdrawal of care. Chen had agreed. The woman had died peacefully, surrounded by family, and Sarah had gone home and cried for the first time since starting residency. You okay? James asked now. Yeah. Sarah took a sip of coffee. Just thinking about Mrs. Patterson. The woman from Tuesday? Yeah. James was quiet for a moment. You made the right call. Chen said so too. I know. Doesn't make it easier. It's not supposed to. Down in the parking lot, the Thornton family was getting into their car. Connor was carrying a bag of his father's belongings. Maya was laughing at something Elizabeth said. David moved slowly, carefully, but he moved on his own. His daughter sent me a message, Sarah said. Maya, she wants to go to medical school now, says watching all this made her want to help people the way we helped her father. That's nice. It's also terrifying. She has no idea what she's signing up for. James smiled. Yeah, but neither did we, and we're still here. Sarah's pager went off. A new admission in the ER, potential sepsis, needs ICU evaluation. The work never stopped. People kept getting sick, kept needing help, kept dying despite everything medicine could offer. I should go, she said. Want backup? I'm good. She wasn't, not really, but she was better than she'd been 3 weeks ago. Better at holding uncertainty, at living with the knowledge that she'd be wrong more often than right, that most of her patients wouldn't have mysterious diagnoses with dramatic cures. In the elevator down to the ER, Sarah checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked tired, older than 29, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Experience, maybe, or just the beginning of wisdom. The ER was its usual controlled chaos. The patient was a 42-year-old man, fever of 104, rapid heart rate, confusion. The ER attending, Dr. Simmons, briefed her quickly. Looks like classic sepsis, but there's something off about the presentation. His labs are weird. Elevated lactate, but not as high as I'd expect. Blood pressure is low, but not critical. I'm thinking we admit. Start broad-spectrum antibiotics. See how he responds." Sarah looked at the monitor, at the patient, at the labs on the screen. She thought about David Thornton, about the pattern she'd seen that no one else had noticed. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, about the pattern she'd looked for and hadn't found because it wasn't there to find. "Can I examine him?" she asked. "Be my guest." She spent 15 minutes at the bedside, thorough but not obsessive, looking for evidence, not just confirmation. When she finished, she had questions but not certainty. "I think we should admit him," she told Dr. Simmons. "Start antibiotics like you said, but I'd also like to run a tox screen and get a detailed medication history. The presentation's consistent with sepsis, but it's also consistent with serotonin syndrome or drug interaction." "Good catch. I'll add that to the workup." 3 hours later, the tox screen came back positive for a dangerous interaction between the patient's prescribed antidepressants and an over-the-counter supplement he'd started taking. Not sepsis, not infection, just a medication reaction that mimicked all the signs. Dr. Simmons called Sarah personally to tell her, "Nice work, Rivera. That could have gone badly if we'd just assumed infection and missed the actual cause." Sarah took the compliment, filed it away with the criticism, the failures, the small victories. She was learning to hold it all, the times she was right, the times she was wrong, the times she simply couldn't know. At 2 a.m., her shift finally ended. She changed out of her scrubs, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the Baltimore night. It was mid-November now, cold enough that she could see her breath. The parking garage was nearly empty, her footsteps echoing in the concrete space. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father, who she hadn't talked to in 2 weeks. "Heard you saved someone's life. Proud of you." She didn't know who'd told him. Probably her brother, who lived in D.C. and sometimes came to visit. She started to type a response, then stopped. "How did you explain that saving one life meant losing others? That the victory felt hollow when you remembered all the times you'd been wrong?" Instead, she just wrote, "Thanks, Dad, love you," driving home through the empty streets. Sarah thought about her mother, about the doctors who'd fought for her, and the ones who'd counseled acceptance. She'd spent so many years angry at the latter, seeing them as defeatists, as people who'd given up too soon. But now she understood something she couldn't have known at 16. That those doctors had been carrying the weight of every patient they couldn't save, every family they'd disappointed, every time hope and reality had diverged. Her mother's doctors hadn't given up. They'd just known what Sarah was only beginning to learn, that medicine was as much about acceptance as it was about fighting, about knowing the difference between the two, about living in the space between hope and despair. Back in her apartment in Fells Point, Sarah made tea and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood settle into its late-night rhythm. A couple walked by, holding hands. A delivery driver dropped off food at the building across the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. She opened her laptop and started writing notes on the sepsis case, on what she'd learned, on what she still needed to understand. Then she pulled up David Thornton's chart, reading through it one more time, looking for lessons she might have missed. There was an email waiting in her inbox from Dr. Chen, sent at 1:47 a.m. "Dr. Rivera, the case presentation on Thornton has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Critical Care Medicine. You'll be listed as second author after Dr. Rashid. Start preparing your section of the manuscript. I want your first-hand account of what made you pursue this when others didn't. Also, you're scheduled to present this case at Grand Rounds next month. Don't embarrass me." Chen Sarah smiled despite herself. It was the closest thing to genuine praise Chen had ever given her, wrapped in his typical gruffness. She closed the laptop and finished her tea, Too wired to sleep yet, but too exhausted to do anything productive. Tomorrow, she'd be back in the ICU, back to the relentless work of keeping people alive and letting them die. Back to making decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. Back to the gap between what she hoped was true and what actually was. But tonight, just for a few hours, she let herself sit with the knowledge that she'd saved one person's life, that David Thornton was home with his family because she'd noticed a pattern everyone else had missed. It wouldn't happen often, might never happen again, but it had happened once, and that meant something. She thought about Maya Thornton, planning to go to medical school, stepping into this impossible profession with fresh hope and naive confidence. In a few years, Maya would learn what Sarah was learning now, that medicine broke your heart more often than it healed it, that for every miracle there were 100 defeats, that the work was brutal and beautiful and unbearably human. Sarah hoped Maya would stick with it anyway. The world needed doctors who could hold contradictions, who could fight and accept, who could notice the small patterns in the noise. The city outside her window hummed with life, people sleeping and waking, hurting and healing, living and dying. And somewhere in that vast, complicated mess of human existence, Sarah Rivera was learning to be the kind of doctor who could stand in the middle of it all and not look away. It was enough. For now, it was enough. 6 months later, Sarah received an email from Maya Thornton. The subject line read, "Update from a future colleague. Dr. Rivera, I wanted to let you know that I just got accepted to medical school at the University of Maryland. I start in August. My dad is doing well, still on medication, still has rough days, but he's working again and complaining about my mum's cooking, so I'd say he's pretty much back to normal. I think about that week in the ICU all the time, not just because it almost killed my dad, but because it showed me what medicine really is. It's not just science, it's not just compassion. It's this weird combination of stubbornness and humility, of fighting and accepting, of seeing patterns that other people miss, and also knowing when you're wrong. You probably saved my dad's life, but more than that, you showed me what kind of doctor I want to be. So thank you, and I hope you're doing okay. I heard residency is brutal." Maya Sarah read the email 3 times. Sitting in the small office she now shared with 2 other residents, she'd been promoted to chief resident for the upcoming year, a decision that had surprised her almost as much as it had surprised Dr. Chen, who'd been the one to recommend her. "You're still stubborn," he told her when offering the position. "Still too emotionally invested sometimes, but you've learned to channel it, to use it when it matters, and set it aside when it doesn't. That's what makes a good doctor. That's what makes a good chief." She typed a response to Maya. "Maya, congratulations on medical school. Maryland is lucky to have you. Your dad's case taught me as much as it taught you, maybe more. I learned that being right once doesn't mean you'll be right the next time. I learned that sometimes the most important thing is not giving up, and sometimes the most important thing is knowing when to stop, figuring out which is which. That's the work. Residency is brutal, you're right about that, but it's also extraordinary. You'll see things you never imagined, save people you never expected to save, and lose people you desperately wanted to keep. You'll make mistakes. You'll doubt yourself. You'll wonder if you chose the wrong career. And then you'll have a patient who gets better because you noticed something everyone else missed, or because you held their hand when they were scared, or because you were there when they needed someone to be there. And you'll remember why you started. Good luck. And when you get to medical school, pay attention to the little details, the patterns in the noise. Sometimes they matter. Dr. Rivera." She hit send and closed her laptop. Outside the office window, Johns Hopkins Hospital continued its endless work. Ambulances arriving, patients being admitted, surgeries being performed, lives being saved and lost in the intricate dance of modern medicine. Sarah thought about David Thornton, walking out of the hospital 6 months ago. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who died peacefully despite everything Sarah had tried. She thought about the dozens of other patients she'd treated in the months since. Some who'd gotten better, some who hadn't, all of them human beings with families and stories and lives that mattered. This was the work. Not dramatic saves every day, not perfect diagnoses and grateful families, just showing up, paying attention, doing her best with incomplete information and impossible circumstances, making peace with uncertainty while never quite accepting it.